there, folks! Why am I reviewing 2 random episodes of Star Trek? Well, because I'm continuing to try and catch up on commissioned reviews that were commissioned through my Patreon. Let's throw it up there right at the front. Why not? It's what supports me and keeps this whole thing going. And maybe I might even be starting to catch up enough where you don't have to wait an embarrassingly long amount of time for me to get to reviews you commission. In any case, I was commissioned to review a pair of episodes from Star Trek The Next Generation. And they are not back-to-back episodes, so this isn't a 2-part story, but they are absolutely tied together and related. And those are the Season 2 episode, The Measure of a Man, and the Season 3 episode, The Offspring. Now, I knew Measure of a Man quite well. It's one that I've seen before several times. It's on, I still have, I think, a DVD that's like best of, it might be best of volume 2, I'm not even sure, but it's on there. So I like Measure of a Man. And this is the episode that kind of tackles a question that if you are going to have a character like Data in Star Trek, you kind of need to address whether you actually make it the body of an episode and of a story the way this does, or whether it's just something that you address in passing dialogue somewhere. It doesn't matter, but somewhere you need to address the fact, why aren't they pulling him apart and figuring out how he works so they can make a heck of a lot more of him? Because he seems really useful. And this tackles that exact thing on the surface. What it's actually doing is it's actually tackling ideas of autonomy, of rights, of can people be property, and the rationales we go through to decide no, they're not, and how wrong that is. And look, here's one thing I would never accuse Star Trek, any Star Trek, of being, and that's subtle. Star Trek doesn't do subtle, but it doesn't have to. Frankly, Star Trek can be moralizing. That's part of its point. And I don't have an inherent problem with that. That's what the show is designed to do. It is not designed to be these subtle, intricate, carefully woven treaties, or at least this era of Star Trek, these carefully woven treaties on these specific elements, and we use the characters to bring out these tiny elements of humanity. No. We're going to say flat out every episode what the point is. That's what original Star Trek was. That's what Next Generation was, definitely. So I'm not going to begrudge it its lack of subtlety. And in fact, in some ways, I'll even commend it. I actually kind of appreciate that the episode goes until about halfway before really addressing the elephant in the room, which is that we have this commander who wants to take apart Data. Data doesn't want that, partly because he doesn't have faith in the guy to actually be able to do it correctly and to not effectively kill Data and not end up with the information that he wants anyways. And then on top of that, just not wanting to do this. And Mannix, this person who wants to take him apart, says, well, you're property. You belong to us. You don't get to say no. And it is nice to have a character like Guinan be the one to say flat out, what if he did succeed? What if you did make thousands upon thousands of people like Data?
Whole generations of disposable people.
And Picard gets the actual line, you're talking about slavery. And Guinan, being a very well-written and well-performed character, goes, well, now that's a little harsh, knowing full well that, no, that's exactly the nail on the head. Having it said out loud was good. Having it said out loud by Whoopi Goldberg was better. I like that this does not dance around the issues. And look, there's nothing wrong with subtlety. But if you're really trying to make a point, there is a value in being blunt sometimes. Not inelegant. I would actually argue you can be elegantly blunt. There are ways to be very clear about what you're doing without having it feel crass and poorly done. And I would say this episode does that. And it also has an interesting approach in terms of law. which is something that I don't know if it's come up elsewhere in Star Trek. Because I'm a fan of Star Trek, but there's like lots of it I haven't seen. But I rather like that this sort of brings up the idea of new law. This is a new situation. So, the Federation, whether it be because they're in new parts of the universe, they are encountering species that they've never dealt with before, or they're encountering situations that have never been encountered before, these precedents matter. And so I like that this entire episode recognizes that not only are we talking about Data's autonomy and Data's freedom and rights to be able to have control over his own life, but that this sets a precedent. This is not just a decision being made now. This is a decision that is going to matter for a long time. And living in the era that we do, especially now, where the courts, especially in America, have become a battlefield where different elements are pushing very hard to get certain judgments handed down so that it gets locked in as being the way that it is. So I appreciate sort of, at least for me and my understanding, maybe it was just as relevant at the time, but in my understanding of the world, it feels more relevant now. And there was something hauntingly familiar about the attitude of Mannix, who is told that Data has rights. And let's remind you, these are his rights to not be subjected to effectively, potentially lethal surgery against his will. And this guy...
Right. I'm sick to death of hearing about rights. What about my right not to have my life work subverted by blind ignorance?
Fuck you. Do you have your right to pursue your dreams, your passion, your research? Yes, absolutely. But some rights supersede others. And it's a fairly well-known phrase that your right to swing your hands about stops where my face begins. You have every right to swing your fist in the air, but the minute it collides with another person's face, they have more right to not be punched in the face than you have to swing your arms around madly. Data has more right to his own say in his own goddamn life than you have to whatever the hell you think is more important. And again, living in a time... Look, I said the show wasn't subtle. Didn't have to be subtle. I won't be subtle. Living in a time where people are saying my right to be allowed to discriminate against you because you are trans, or I choose to read you as trans or gay, and therefore I do not wish to serve you or give you medical attention, my right is being violated if I am not allowed to violate your rights to be treated like a human goddamn being. Again, fuck you. So that's Measure of a Man. Still really good. The lack of subtlety that all Star Trek of this era has, but it's good. It's really good. Then there's The Offspring. Now, The Offspring... I wanted to say I hadn't seen it before, but bits of it felt familiar. I think it was an episode that I kind of popped in and out of while it was airing. I think largely because a lot of the moments of the interaction of the main, catalyst of that whole episode, I'll get into this in a minute if you're not familiar with it. It lends itself to a lot of cringe humor. And from a very young age, I've always hated that. I've always hated, even if it's not being used for humorous elements, and it's not always, but the very idea of we're going to put someone in a situation where it's totally obvious this is going to be embarrassing and off-putting and awkward, and we're just going to let it happen. I hate that. I've always hated that. So I'm pretty sure, thinking back on it now, it was an episode I popped in and out of. Now, the reason that it lends itself to that kind of material is this is where Data creates the titular Offspring. He has constructed his own replica of a positronic brain and is duplicating his build and synapses into it in the belief that he will basically be able to create, well, not a copy of himself, but an offspring. Effectively, his child. And that is Lal. And Lal is referred to as Data's child by Data pretty much immediately. Picard's reluctant to go there, but, Picard hates kids. So, understandable. There's some interesting things at play in this, and there's some interesting, again, not subtle, but some interesting things at play in terms of parenting, in terms of how qualified is anybody to raise their own kid. Isn't it a good thing if they think and learn different from us and come to understand things possibly better than we do? Are we as prepared as we should be? Is anybody? Should somebody step in just because maybe another person could theoretically do it better? What's the threshold for that? This is stuff handled pretty well. The stuff handled at the front end regarding gender, on the other hand, is not. It's not. Now, look, to be fair, this thing would have aired in the early 90s. I'm not going to begrudge it, these lines that I'm about to quote, but as I always say with anything, I can only come at this with the perspective that I have. And look at me. I have thoughts and opinion on gender. And while I am not going to accuse the writers or creators or actors or spoke the lines or of anything, any kind of phobia or anything, I understand the general cultural understanding of the nuances of gender wasn't then what it is now. I get it. I still need to call out some of these lines, though, because holy crap. So I've got two that I wrote down. One's an exchange and one is a single line. So initially when we are introduced to Lal is kind of off-putting, very inhuman, and that's not what's off-putting, but Lal is unclothed and not quite flesh-toned, but not a million miles off, with no distinguishing gendered features whatsoever. And I think, honestly, it's the nudity aspect of it that kind of makes me go, I don't know. There's just something in my gut that says, just because they don't have the same secondary or primary sex characteristics as the rest of us doesn't make it okay that they're just paraded around naked if it's not okay for the rest of us. Like, it feels weird. And, like, is that strange and prudish and my take on a social construct of nudity and appropriate behavior? Yes, absolutely. But that's just how I felt about it. It felt weird watching Lal wander around naked in the hallways. It just felt strange and odd to me. But while they're doing that, this is the exchange that happens between Lal and Data. Lal looks to Counselor Troy. Human, female. Looks at some other crew members. Humans, male. Looks to themselves.
And I am gender neuter, inadequate.
Oh boy. Okay. And then...
That is why you must choose a gender, Lal, to complete your appearance.
Yeah. Again, I cannot reasonably have an expectation of this show to have understood the concepts of any gender other than male or female, to understand non-binary fluidity, that it's a spectrum, that neuter is an option, neuter is not inadequate, and one who wishes or currently does present as neuter or androgynous, or even if they don't present that way but they identify as such, does not have to select male or female. Whew. Again, I understand the time it was done, but that was jarring in a bad way. And then I forget how badly written Counselor Troy was a lot of the time, and how it was very clear that Marina Sirtis didn't know how to massage these lines into anything good. And I feel bad for her sometimes. But there's when Lal is going through the 4 options that it's been narrowed down to that maybe they want to go with for their appearance. And first we see an Andorian male. And Troy goes, well, that would be the only one on board. Might make for some trouble with socialization. And then human male. Her response, and this is so robotic from her too.
Very attractive. There's no problem with socialization here.
So let's add into the mix that this society that's supposed to have risen above a lot of this stuff still is going to flatly, openly value attractiveness as being key to socialization. Your life is so much easier when you're pretty. Thanks, counselor. Thank you for that. And also, there's a line later, there weren't subtitles on when I saw this, so I couldn't bring it up and confirm this. There's an admiral, I'm pretty sure he dropped the R word.
His presence would undoubtedly retard the new android's progress.
That was weird. Anyway, so, like I said, the gender stuff, not great. The parenting stuff is better. Again, not subtle and not as good as Measure of a Man, largely because it is harder to relate and understand and have any degree of empathy with the position of the Admiral who's trying to take Lal away from Data to raise her and study her as like he thinks should be done. And as I said, this is much more an idea of parenting. Now, it's odd to me that this actually touches on Measure of a Man, mentioning that, these are beings that are sentient with their own rights, and that Picard helped establish that. I'm like, that law seems to be carrying a weirdly small amount of pull, given that he's still prepared to issue an order. I'm ordering you to hand over this other android to me. Like, how is that even still an option? And there isn't enough pushback on that. The captain pushes back pretty hard. There isn't nearly enough pushback from Data on that. It's weird. It's odd. And like I said, this admiral is way less understandable than Mannix. I think it was Mannix. Or whatever his name is. Because in Measure of a Man, he failed to recognize Data as a sentient life form. And all of his positions stemmed from his core idea that Data is a machine. They tried to find a middle ground with this admiral where he's not taking that same position, and he understands that Data and by extension Lal have sentience and rights, and yet he's still trampling over them. Now, obviously, in reality, does that happen anyway? Even though certain people, yes, I understand that's human, but I'm still going to try and squash their rights. Yes, it absolutely does. But we don't have enough time with this person to have it work as a character trait, because it's just too one-dimensional. He's just designated bad guy, and he says, just flat out, we could raise her better. Based on what? About the only argument he makes with any merit is having two unique androids on the same ship is a bad idea, because what if this ship blows up? Then we have none. That's the only argument he made that had any validity. Other than that, it's basically just because I say so. He didn't have a case to make. He just tried to pull rank, which makes him far less interesting, and this entire conflict far less compelling. And then it's extra weird because they take this one-note jerk and try and give him a humanizing moment, because towards the end, Lal's positronic brain starts to break down, which it was going to have to, because otherwise the show would have been able to have other androids like Data. And if the show wanted Data to remain unique, she was going to have to fall apart, or something was going to have to be wrong by the end. That was just going to have to happen. And after it does, I understand what they were going for, that he sees, and we as an audience only get to hear about, the desperation with which Data was trying to keep her alive. And it's clear that this guy recognizes the humanity of, being a parent in that desperation, and now sees Data as more of a person. On paper, it works okay, but it's it flies in the face of his failure to recognize any of the parenting instincts that Data had demonstrated to his face prior to that. It doesn't flow. But in terms of the parenting and the questions about parenting and the concerns and the joys and the fears of it, they're in here decently. But it doesn't come together as well as Measure of a Man does. But it is interesting to watch these, especially paired together. And so, thank you very much for the commission. Oh, and other random note, thank you to Measure of a Man for, giving retroactive purpose and meaning to that bizarre, very stupid thing that happened with Tasha Yar and Data in season 1. Like, thank you for giving that some substance and not letting it just be what it was. I am fully functional. God. Anyways, what do you think about these episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I plugged the Patreon earlier. I'll mention it again. Link in the description. I already did the thing up in the corner. So, that would be incredibly helpful. And you can commission me to review stuff, but no pressure. Take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break.